July 26, 1942, Przemyśl, Poland. The San River cuts through the heart of Przemyśl like a wound that never heals. In the summer of 1942, this Polish city near the Ukrainian border existed in two worlds, separated by more than just water. On one side, the German military command operated from requisitioned buildings. On the other, behind barbed wire and guarded gates, thousands of Jewish families waited in a ghetto that had become a holding pen for the condemned. The morning sun rose with indifferent beauty. In the narrow streets of the Jewish quarter, mothers prepared what meager breakfast they could from rationed supplies. Children stirred in rooms that housed 3 or 4 families where one had lived before. Old men said morning prayers with a fervor born of desperation, but this morning was different. Even before dawn, residents had noticed increased German presence. SS units in their distinctive black uniforms had begun positioning themselves around the ghetto perimeter. Trucks arrived. Orders were shouted. Those who had survived previous actions recognized the signs. This was the final liquidation. On the other side of the river, in the Wehrmacht military command office, a 51-year-old reserve officer named Albert Battel was also awake early. Intelligence reports suggested something was imminent. As adjutant to Major Max Liedtke, the local military commander, Battel had access to information that painted a clear picture. The SS was preparing to liquidate the Przemyśl ghetto. Albert Battel cut an unremarkable figure for a man about to defy the most powerful genocidal machine in human history. Balding, with the slight paunch of middle age, he looked more like a small-town lawyer than a military officer, which was precisely what he had been. Born in Prussian Silesia in 1891, Battel had fought in World War I, earning an Iron Cross. After the war, he studied law and established himself as a respected lawyer and notary. Like many Germans, Battel had watched his country collapse into economic chaos during the Weimar years. When Hitler promised to restore Germany's greatness, Battel joined the Nazi Party in May 1933. He was not an ideologue. He did not hate Jews. He was a patriot who believed in law, order, and national recovery. But the system revealed itself to be something Battel had not anticipated. He had already been investigated by party tribunals for extending a loan to a Jewish colleague. Later, while serving in Przemyśl, he was formally reprimanded for shaking hands with Dr. Ignacy Duldig, the head of the Jewish council in the ghetto, who happened to be an old friend from university. Now, as he reviewed intelligence reports, Battel understood that Dr. Duldig and thousands of others were hours away from death. He knew what resettlement meant. The trains did not go to work camps. They went to Belzec, an extermination camp less than 100 kilometers away, where Jews were murdered in gas chambers. The Przemyśl ghetto held between 22,000 and 24,000 people, crammed into an area that had originally housed perhaps 3,000 Mulern. Conditions were medieval. Raw sewage ran in the streets. Typhus and dysentery moved through the population. People were starving on rations of watery soup and stale bread. But the ghetto was also a source of labor the German military needed. Jewish craftsmen repaired vehicles, manufactured parts, maintained equipment essential to Wehrmacht operations. They worked in workshops, producing goods that supported the German war machine that was simultaneously planning their extermination. By summer 1942, Operation Reinhard was in full swing across occupied Poland. Named for Reinhard Heydrich, The operation aimed to murder all Jews in the general government. 3 extermination camps had been constructed: Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka. Unlike concentration camps that enslaved prisoners, these were pure killing factories. Belzec was murdering as many as 15,000 people per day. At approximately 8 a.m. on July 26th, SS units completed their encirclement of the ghetto. Orders were clear. No one enters, no one leaves. The liquidation would begin at noon. Inside the ghetto, panic spread. People who had hidden valuables dug them up, hoping to bribe their way to safety. Mothers clutched children. Young men debated whether to resist, knowing it was futile. A delegation from the ghetto got word to the Wehrmacht command. Jewish workers employed in Wehrmacht workshops sent desperate messages. They were skilled craftsmen, essential workers. Surely that counted for something. Major Max Liedtke convened an emergency meeting with his staff, including Battel. Liedtke was a professional soldier, not a Nazi ideologue. Like many Wehrmacht officers, he viewed the SS with contempt and wariness. The SS operated under Himmler's command, parallel to the regular military. They had their own brutal methods. Battel made his case carefully. The Jewish workers were essential to Wehrmacht operations. Vehicles needed repair. Equipment required maintenance. From a purely military standpoint, liquidating these workers made no sense. But Battel's argument went beyond strategy. These were human beings, civilians, non-combatants. He cited paragraph 47 of the German military code, which allowed soldiers to refuse orders that were clearly illegal. Liedtke listened. He understood that the SS's obsession with murdering Jews was counterproductive to Germany's war effort. The decision was made. The Wehrmacht would intervene. They could not stop the liquidation entirely, but they could protect Jews genuinely essential to military operations. Liedtke issued orders: occupy the bridge over the San River and deny passage to anyone without Wehrmacht authorization. The bridge was the only access point into the ghetto. By controlling it, they could control access. At approximately 11 a.m., Wehrmacht soldiers moved into position on the bridge. They set up a checkpoint with sandbags and a machine gun. A sergeant major took command with orders to state that Wehrmacht operations required unimpeded access to essential workers. Shortly before noon, the SS column approached the bridge. Several trucks loaded with Ukrainian auxiliary troops. The convoy stopped at the Wehrmacht checkpoint. An SS officer climbed out, confusion and irritation on his face. What was the meaning of this? The sergeant major stated that the Wehrmacht required access to Jewish workers, essential to military operations. Until those workers were secured, the bridge would remain under Wehrmacht control. Any attempt to force passage would be considered aggression against the Wehrmacht. For several long moments, 2 groups of armed Germans faced each other. Local Polish residents could scarcely believe what they were seeing. Wehrmacht soldiers stood with weapons trained on SS men and Ukrainian auxiliaries. The SS officer radioed his superiors. The response was clear: proceed with liquidation, but avoid armed confrontation with the Wehrmacht at all costs. Any shooting between Wehrmacht and SS would create a political crisis reaching Berlin. But there was no other way. The bridge was the only route. While this standoff continued, Battel was already in motion with the second phase. He had assembled a convoy of Wehrmacht trucks and trusted soldiers. His orders: enter the ghetto, locate essential workers, evacuate them to Wehrmacht barracks, use force if necessary against anyone, including SS personnel, who interfered. Battel led his convoy into the ghetto from an alternate route. The ghetto streets were chaos. SS men and Ukrainians were forcing residents into the open. Shots rang out. People screamed. Families were separated. Into this hell drove Battel's trucks. Wehrmacht soldiers jumped out and began gathering workers from lists Battel carried. But as he moved through the ghetto, he began adding names not on any list. Families of workers, children, the elderly, people who happened to be nearby. At one checkpoint, SS guards refused to let the trucks pass. Battel stepped out and threatened to call in a full Wehrmacht platoon and force his way through if necessary. It was an absurd bluff, but delivered with such conviction that the confused SS guards stepped aside. Battel made 5 round trips into and out of the ghetto over several hours. Each time, his trucks filled with people. Each time, he delivered them to Wehrmacht barracks under official protection. By late afternoon, Battel had evacuated approximately 500 people. The exact figure will never be known, but on July 26, 1942, roughly 500 Jews did not board the trains to Belzec because one Wehrmacht lieutenant decided that military law and basic human decency mattered more than SS orders. The remaining 22,000 residents were not so fortunate. Over the following days, they were deported to Belzec. The journey took hours in sealed cattle cars without water or sanitation. Upon arrival, the healthy were sent to gas chambers. The sick and elderly were shot at the platform. Dr. Duldig was among those murdered. The aftermath rippled outward, but the SS was furious. An investigation was initiated. Reports reached Heinrich Himmler himself. When he read the reports from Przemyśl, he was personally enraged. A Wehrmacht officer had actively protected Jews during a liquidation action. Himmler sent investigation files to Martin Bormann, Hitler's personal secretary. His note was clear. Albert Battel was to be expelled from the Nazi Party immediately, and upon the war's conclusion, arrested and executed. But Himmler faced a problem. Wehrmacht officers could not simply be arrested by the SS without creating a massive institutional crisis. And in 1942, with Germany fighting on multiple fronts, such a crisis was unacceptable. The Wehrmacht's response was revealing. Battel was officially punished. House arrest, revocation of his Iron Cross, transfer to a different posting. But he was not court-martialed, not imprisoned, not handed to the SS. The Wehrmacht protected its own. What makes Battel's story remarkable is not that he stood alone. Historian David H. Kitterman spent years examining archives and conducting interviews. His research documented 135 cases of German soldiers, police officers, and officials who refused orders to execute Jews, hostages, partisans, or prisoners of war during World War II. The most significant finding was simple but profound. None of these 135 individuals were executed for their refusal to kill civilians. This directly contradicted the narrative that Germans had no choice because refusing orders meant death. Those who refused did face consequences. They were stripped of rank, imprisoned, beaten, transferred to dangerous frontline positions. But they survived. The Nazi system had enough institutional friction that principled resistance, while costly, was not automatically fatal. The truth was more damning than the myth. Germans who participated in mass murder did so not because they were forced at gunpoint, but because they chose to. They chose conformity, obedience, and in many cases, enthusiastic participation. Albert Battel was different. He was not a political radical. He was a Nazi Party member. He was not particularly religious. He was not young and idealistic. At 51, he knew the risks. He was not seeking glory. What Battel had was simpler and more profound, a belief that law mattered. As a lawyer, he had spent his life in a world where rules and justice were supposed to mean something. When the Nazi state asked him to abandon those principles, something in him refused. Battel continued to serve until 1944, when heart disease forced his discharge. He returned to Breslau. In the war's final months, he was conscripted into the Volkssturm, commanded by Himmler himself, the man who had sworn to execute him. Battel was captured by Soviet forces, but eventually released. Post-war years were difficult. Because of his Nazi Party membership, he was prohibited from practicing law. The man who had risked his life to save Jews was treated as a Nazi collaborator. He settled in West Germany, living quietly, struggling with his health. Albert Battel died on March 17, 1952, in Hattersheim am Main. He was 61 years old. His death was not noteworthy. No newspapers wrote obituaries. He died in obscurity, his moment of extraordinary courage unknown to the world. For nearly 3 decades, Battel's story remained buried in classified archives. The story's resurrection came through Dr. Zeev Goshen, an Israeli lawyer and historian, who tracked down documents and interviewed survivors. In 1981, nearly 30 years after Battel's death, Yad Vashem posthumously recognized Albert Battel as one of the righteous among the nations. This honor is bestowed upon non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust. Battel's recognition was particularly significant because he was a Nazi Party member and Wehrmacht officer. But Yad Vashem's researchers concluded that his actions met the criteria. He had saved lives at considerable personal risk. The story of Przemyśl on July 26, 1942, challenges comfortable narratives. Battel was a Nazi who saved Jews. He exploited institutional dysfunction to protect civilians. He acted not from heroic virtue, but from stubborn adherence to legal principles most had abandoned. This messiness is important. It reveals that even in totalitarian systems, individuals retain agency. They can choose. The Germans who participated in the Holocaust had alternatives. They might have faced punishment for refusing, but research proves they would not have been executed for refusing to murder civilians. The myth of following orders allowed thousands of perpetrators to claim they had no choice. The evidence from Battel and 133 other documented cases proves that claim false. People had choices. Most chose to participate. Some chose to resist. The difference was character and conscience. For those who survived because of Battel, the story carried profound meaning. Michael Goldman Gilad was a teenager in the ghetto when Battel's trucks arrived. Decades later, he testified, "We Jews knew that we had a protector in him. In the hell of occupied Poland, knowing one German officer saw you as human could mean the difference between despair and hope. The broader lessons extend beyond World War II. Every generation faces moments when the law or the state demands actions that violate human dignity. What Battel teaches is that resistance is possible. It may be costly and difficult. You may be punished, but it is possible. The Holocaust happened not because every German was a committed Nazi, but because most Germans made small choices of compliance every day. They accepted restrictions on Jewish neighbors. They looked away when violence occurred. They took administrative jobs processing deportations. Each action seemed minor, but collectively they enabled industrialized mass murder. Albert Battel's resistance was also collective. He could not have succeeded without Lidke's authorization, the sergeant major's willingness to threaten SS forces, the soldiers who drove the trucks. One person's choice to resist created space for others to make similar choices. The righteous. Among the nations includes more than 27,000 individuals from dozens of countries. They represent a tiny fraction of populations under Nazi occupation. Most people were not heroes. Most did not resist. The righteous are exceptional because they were so rare. But their rarity does not diminish their significance. Every person recognized as righteous proved that resistance was possible in their circumstances. Each story refutes the claim that compliance was the only option. Albert Battel died unknown and unrecognized, but the story survived. Through determined researchers and survivor testimony, the truth of what happened in Przemyśl was recovered. And in that recovery lies a message. Acts of resistance matter, even when they seem small, even when they fail to stop the larger horror. Battel's 5 truck trips did not stop Operation Reinhard. They did not save the 22,000 deported to Belzec. They did not prevent the Holocaust, but they saved approximately 500 lives, which to those 500 people and their families meant everything. They proved defiance was possible. The order everyone followed was to participate in genocide, to facilitate mass murder. Following that order was easy, safe, and encouraged. Albert Battel chose not to follow it. He paid a price, though not the ultimate price. His career was damaged. He lived under threat of execution, but he kept his conscience. He kept his belief that law and human dignity mattered. He kept the knowledge that when the moment came, he had acted rightly rather than easily. In the end, that may be all any of us can hope for, that when faced with a choice between evil and good, between compliance and resistance, we have the courage to choose well. Albert Battel made that choice. 500 people lived because of it. The story asks, what would you have done? But more importantly, what will you do when your moment comes? Such moments arrive in every life, when we must choose between what is right and what is safe, what is just and what is legal, what is human and what is ordered. Albert Battel's answer echoes across the decades, a quiet reminder that even in the darkest times, even when everyone else is following orders, one person can still say no. If this story moved you, please share it. These are not just historical lessons, but living questions every generation must answer anew. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. Where are you watching from? Have you heard other stories of resistance from World War II? Do you have family members who lived through this period? What would you want us to cover next? And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel. We're committed to bringing you stories of real people from World War II, stories that textbooks often miss, stories that reveal the complexity of human choice in extreme circumstances. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering. And thank you for understanding that the question, what would you have done, is really asking, what will you do when your moment arrives?